Hey guys, so I am live with Mr. Brian Kurtz. Many of you may already know him. I'm sure most of the people in my audience already know him as the guy who used to run Boardroom and now runs Titans and recently released his book with Craig Simpson. You may remember from my interview a couple of weeks back. Anyways, I'm really looking forward to this interview and let's just jump straight into it. Hey Brian, how you doing, mate?
I'm good. It's like I've never done back. I did an interview, I told you, last night at like 11 p.m. Eastern time in the States with another good guy from Australia. So I don't know. I think maybe it's time to move to Australia. I mean, there's a lot of people that are moving out of the country here in the United States. So not that I'm not one of them. But.
Let's not even get into that. Let me check the audio is working.
Yeah, we're not doing any politics. Although I'll just say one quick thing, because I've seen a lot of posts. I never post anything about politics. I'm not going to tell you who I voted for. And I know a lot of your audience is probably not American, but they're probably a mix. But the thing I will tell you, yeah. I mean, well, I just love teaching in Europe. I love teaching all over the world, and I'm not the American that thinks we're better than everybody, but I am the American that believes that marketing is, kind of originates in the U.S. for the most part, or at least the state of the art stuff. And then, so many great people all over the world are adapting stuff that we do in the U.S. But the point I wanted to make, which I think is really fascinating, and it kind of can lead into some questions if you want about copywriting and marketing, following Donald Trump, his campaign, his copy. Let's forget, this is not a political conversation. Looking at his messaging, looking at his copy. Gary Halbert, who's one of the legends that I profile in my book with Craig, always said, it's not about, you want a starving crowd. I mean, he understood that better than anybody. Building a brilliant burger has nothing to do with whether you're going to, sell a lot of burgers. It's really what does the audience want? And so the other thing was the languaging. Gene Schwartz, another legend in my book, used to say, you've got your market, you've got the language of that market, speak to that market in that language. Now, did he have a message that went to everybody? Maybe not, but I will tell you this, his message appealed to everybody. And Gary Halbert, he used to say, right to, I guess, a fifth grade level. And when you're above a seventh grade level, you're going to lose a lot of your audience, and that you have to use language that they understand. During the primary period, if you studied Donald Trump's speeches, more so than in the general campaign, that there's not one speech I ever saw him make that a fifth grader couldn't understand. And not only that, it was like stuff that you listen to it, and whether you agree or disagree, you get exactly what he's saying. Who doesn't understand, I'm going to build a wall and I'm going to put a door in it? Everybody then gets an image. And I don't think he studied Gary Halbert. Mind you. But he understood human nature. He understood a certain element. And so studying the copywriting of Donald Trump is really an interesting exercise. And I'll bet a lot of copywriters I know are already doing it, because in my mastermind groups, we've had this discussion. But you want to look all around you all the time for clues as to how people are communicating to specific audiences. And that's kind of one of my big things, messaging and copy to list. And every list should be talked to differently. And Donald Trump talked to a very big list in a very powerful way.
One of the biggest direct response campaigns. Every 4 years, you can observe direct response when you're spending millions upon millions of dollars in ad spend, PR, everything.
Exactly.
See the response. If you're looking at, as you were saying then, he had a limited budget, which he stretched way further than his competitors. Classic underdogs.
Yeah, and he knew that he had the pulpit. When there wasn't once. That was a nice thing that he would say controversial stuff so that every news organization would put him on in prime time. You can't pay for that, and he knew that. But then the messaging, and again, this is not about whether I agree or disagree. And anybody who comments here, anybody who comments on my politics, you're wrong. Whatever you're thinking, you're wrong. Whether you think I'm for him or against him, you're wrong. I can tell you for a fact. So this is really there's a marketing case study in this particular election that every copywriter should study and adapt.
I've just had a friend comment here: 768 million ad spend, $5.38 per vote. That's one way of looking at it.
Oh, that's pretty funny. The ROI per vote. I love it. I love it. I love it.
Cool. Let's talk a bit about your background, because, like I said, most of my audience knows who you are, but I think there's quite a few that still don't. Could you tell us where you started, what did you do, and where are you now?
Yeah. So, it's funny because I'm on a lot of podcasts that are based on that the avatar are mostly entrepreneurs and young entrepreneurs. And while I am an entrepreneur at my core, the interesting thing is that, the privileged part of my upbringing, as it were, not that I was, born with a silver spoon in my mouth and, I came from a working class family. It was, not, it wasn't hard, but it wasn't super easy. It just, I had a kind of a boring childhood in that respect. However, the thing that was interesting is that I always felt like, if I wasn't going to be a teacher like all of my family were, that I wanted to go into business, or I wanted to write. I wanted to do something that was different. And I definitely had this entrepreneurial gene in me, but it wasn't the norm. It wasn't like I couldn't work for anybody. It wasn't like I saw myself as unemployable, because I was a team player. I liked people. I didn't need to be on my own and make all the decisions. But what was interesting is that, the privileged part of my background, as I said, was, getting a job at Boardroom when I was 23, a company that was a $3 million business at the time, growing, run by an entrepreneur, the typical kitchen table startup entrepreneur, Marty Edelston. And, to have somebody who then saw in me what he saw in himself without me having to take the risk of starting the thing from scratch. Yeah, it's a pretty privileged thing. And I've written about it. I'm not apologizing for it. It is what it is. But the thing that I did do, and the thing that I think I'd want to talk to your folks about, especially if they're not on their own yet, but they want to be on their own, is that if you're not entrepreneurial, you always have to be intrapreneurial. And that word gets spell checked, so it's not really a word. But intrapreneurial with an I is a very, very important concept, especially if you're working for the man, so to speak. And even if you're in a big corporate environment, there are ways. It's harder, but the fact that if you can work in an entrepreneurial environment and have your ideas heard, report directly to the entrepreneur, not get discouraged when your ideas are nixed, because a lot of entrepreneurs always think that their ideas are better than yours anyway, but stick with that and always have a voice and always think about being a rainmaker, even though you're not the primary rainmaker initially. That is a mindset of entrepreneurialism that I say to people: if you can figure out a road, I was lucky in a lot of ways, but I made the most of it. And then, within 10 years of being at Boardroom, I was an owner. I was, Marty gave me a lot of responsibility to kind of run the marketing of the company. And then the journey, those who don't know my background, not that, I throwing numbers around I'm uncomfortable with. Everybody seems to want to do it. But the company did go from 3 million in 1981, 3 to 5. And then we hit our peak in 2005, 2006, and we were about 157 million. And a lot of that was just being a great multi-channel direct marketer. We did direct mail. That's where we cut our teeth. We learned what to do on the internet, not as well as I would have liked. I would have liked to have done more. But we definitely learned e-newsletters. We definitely learned an advertising model and an affiliate model to some degree. But then we also learned how to do TV. We learned how to do print advertising in space. We learned how to do inserts. We as I said, I never met a medium I didn't like, and we would just test everything. So being a entrepreneur, always thinking of new ideas, having an entrepreneur who would support me, so then I could become the entrepreneur within the organization, which is what the entrepreneur is. And then when Marty started phasing out, I was the number one rainmaker after being the number two rainmaker. And I had a lot of training, and I was in a good position. And then, I did the Big Titans event in 2014, which was a big tribute event to Marty after he passed away. And it was an epic event. Kind of like one of the things I wanted to do before I left, because I didn't see the company, I was working closely with Marty's family, and I thought that if I wasn't going to buy the company, from the family and not in a hostile way, I thought it was just better for them to do what they want to do with the business. And then it was time for me to go out and become an educator. And so after 34 years at Boardroom building that, I decided I went out with a bang, this Titans event. Those of your listeners who were not at the event, just to give you a sense, it was pretty epic. The speakers were, it was Dan Kennedy, Gary Bencivenga, best copywriter alive, then all the great copywriters who work for Boardroom, Paris Lampropoulos, David Deutsch, Eric Betwell, and Arthur Johnson, who were responsible for, I think, 650 million pieces of successful direct mail over 20 years at Boardroom. Then I had Ken McCarthy, who was one of the pioneers on the internet. That was day one. Then I had Perry Marshall, Jay Abraham, Joe Sugarman, Greg Renker of Guthrie Renker, who's the infomercial guy, Fred Katona, who just passed, who's probably the king of direct response radio. And then I brought together some of my contemporaries, Jim Quick, Michael Fishman, and Ryan Lee, who are kind of the people who are trailblazing today, both online and offline. So it was one of those events. And then after the event, it was like, okay, I can kind of launch an direct marketing education business from this. And then from that, I developed 2 mastermind groups. I wrote the book with Craig. I've got a bunch of ideas for courses. The course I really want to do is direct mail for internet marketers. It's a funny thing, what goes around comes around. And I've got more internet marketers writing to me saying, what's this direct mail thing? I hear it's like a new medium that I could kind of work on.
Seriously?
Oh, yeah. Not one that, well, they say, I'm being a little sarcastic, but they are basically saying direct mail, I'm hearing something about it. Do you realize that everything, and that's what the book is about, that, the advertising solution Craig and I wrote, that the book is about, the fundamentals. Perry Marshall talks about, Perry Marshall, the guy who's the Google AdWords guy, Facebook, one of the first Facebook guys, one of the best direct marketers around, almost all online, talks about the fundamentals. And he and I just did an interview about source, about, when you go back to the original source, it's everything. I told a story recently to a couple of people that I did another podcast where the interviewer wanted to take a deep dive on modeling in direct mail, regression list modeling and segmentation. And I talked about the statistics behind it. Not that I'm a statistician, but I understood it. And we took this deep dive, and it got a little granular, but it was a good discussion. And then at the end of the discussion, he was just, he was so into what we were talking about. He posted the interview on Facebook. And then someone in the thread on Facebook said, oh, this interview with Brian Kurtz is amazing. Not that I care. He said, this interview with Brian Kurtz was amazing. He talks all about these modeling. And here, I thought Facebook invented lookalike models. And I'm thinking to myself, whoa. And then he goes, mind blown. And I'm thinking to myself, this is unbelievable.
You posted this, didn't you? I remember you posted
this. Yeah, I
did
post it.
Yeah.
I did. And the guy, it's funny, the guy who posted that, mind blown, the guy's a really good marketer. So this is not a put down of him at all. It's just that he would never have known the extent to which we modeled and segmented our lists in direct mail in my world in the 1980s and 90s, but even before that, and how that was a precursor to everything that's being done with modeling on Facebook today, everything that's being done in Google AdWords. I mean, if you follow the work of Ryan Levesque, for example, and his Ask survey, yeah, it's all about list segmentation. It's all about, in fact, my blurb for his book was something about, Ryan, it's one of the most important books, his Ask book about, since breakthrough advertising, which was Gene Schwartz's classic. And because it's basically monitoring human behavior and then how we message to the different segments. The idea of what Ryan does in terms of creating buckets and then how we communicate to those buckets, it's brilliant. It's just, total brilliance. And so it's not just what goes around comes around. It's not just taking a stroll down memory lane. It's bigger than that. If you understand the sources, just to use that other example about Facebook, if you understood what it was like to do regression modeling in direct mail in the 1980s and 90s, think about the kinds of questions you might ask your media broker or buyer on Facebook when you're doing a lookalike model. You will have a whole different mindset when you're asking questions about what demographics and psychographics to go after, and it'll be more than just likes. It'll be more, you'll ask questions that you never thought you would ever ask. So I'm such a believer in the fundamental truths, and I know this is not just me. That's why for the book, if you notice the blurbs, I got Levesque to write a blurb, I got Jeff Walker to write a blurb, I got Yannick Silver to write a blurb. I mean, I got people who are considered some of the best online marketers in the world to basically write a blurb for me, not because I twisted their arm, but because they understand that the fundamentals of direct response marketing never go away.
Anyone who's really got chops has studied the classics. The turn of the century guys are the ones who pretty much cemented what we know now. All that's changed is the method or the medium, but it still comes down to the same principles.
It does. You look at scientific advertising, which I have a illustrated and annotated version that I'm giving away as a bonus for people who buy the book. And that book was written in 1923. Claude Hopkins died in 1937, the author of the book. That book is 100% relevant. I mean, there are people today that say, a copywriter comes to me and says, what books would you recommend? One, Breakthrough Advertising, although it's more advanced. Written in 1966 by Gene Schwartz. Not one word has changed. I'm reprinting it right now, and I'm not changing one word of the text. I might add a few ads and an appendix and an afterword, but I'm not changing one word of the text, and it's 100% relevant. And the same with scientific advertising. And the thing is, it's like human nature doesn't change. It's funny. I have an email address that's T-Rex, like the dinosaur, and I'm making fun in a way, but it's sort of like I do it because it's like I'm not poking fun at myself. It's that it's the non-extinct dinosaurs that will definitely still roam the earth, and it's not because we're preaching. It's not because the other stuff was better than what's today. It's the exact opposite. What's going on today in marketing, this is the best time in the world ever to be a marketer. And so I am just having a blast being able to, I always talk about my golden ticket. You don't know me that well and you're a lot younger than me, and yet you want to interview me. Why? I don't know, but I'm excited about it. And so now I get a golden ticket to talk to your audience who I never would have gotten to talk to about this stuff. And you know what? I'll bet out of this interview at some point, whether it's tomorrow, next week, a year from now, I'll be at a conference, I'll be on someone else's thing, and they'll say, I heard you on Jose's interview, and they're going to say, I love what you talk. Maybe they'll say, I hated what you talk about. I love what you talk about. And you know what? I'll find out, what do you do? And they're going to tell me that they're working on some, whiz bang technology as it adapts, demographic data to YouTube. And I'm going to be like, can I know more about that? Because I want to bring that to my clients. I want to bring that to my mastermind. Maybe you want to be on a phone call with my high-end direct response marketer mastermind group and teach them something that I definitely don't know. So what a great opportunity, right?
You mentioned this before, just the fact, yes, last night for you,
you were
talking, you're right.
I should have turned that off, but I didn't. Sorry.
That's a beauty of live interviews, mate. We get to experience everything.
Yeah, it's fine. It's early in the morning. I said no one's going to call me, but go ahead.
It's all good. So the beauty of the age we're living in now is we're more connected. There's more data available, so you can use those direct response principles that you spoke about before, and that we're so well taught with so much more data available to us now. It's just a gold mine for someone who has more experience. It really is.
That's well put. It's sort of like, let's take what we knew and then, put it on steroids in a way. And that is super exciting. And the interesting thing is that, when Perry Marshall said our book, the book that Craig and I wrote, should sit next on the desk of marketers today as a checklist so you don't miss anything. That's a pretty good use, of stuff, right? That's a pretty good use, that you have a list of everything that should go in a headline, everything that should go in a sales letter, tips to doing the right kind of research. I mean, those are things that are just so powerful, and they don't go away. They just don't go away. And it's funny, I did a post in a Facebook group, big Facebook group, and I basically said, I wasn't doing it for people to feel sorry for me. And some people were like, coming to my defense. I didn't need that. But the post was something like, I'm being hammered a little bit by not that many people, but a couple of people saying, why do I want to learn about 6 dead guys who, none of them marketed, on the internet for the most part. I mean, the most recent guy that we cover in the book is Gary Halbert. And Halbert was definitely alive when the internet was here, but he was still a direct mail guy for the most part and a print guy. So, when people, I said I'm being hammered by people saying, why do I need to follow 6 dead guys who never worked on the internet? And I said, it seems to me that they're missing out. And then the thread got really long. There were a few people that said, "Oh, Brian, don't worry about it." I said, "I'm not worried. I'm not worried." But I just want you to know that there's a mindset out there that says if it's old news, it's bad news. And you know what? I know because I hang out with people like Jay Abraham. I hang out with people like Perry Marshall, and they're very different, right? Jay is older than me. Perry's younger than me. But they both respect the past in a way so that they can adapt the best of the past into the present and into the future. That, to me, is a gold mine. And there's a gold mine of information in these classic pioneers and their books that I think a lot of online marketers today are missing out on. And they're already making money. Easy to make money on the internet. Much harder to sustain yourself for the long haul. So the idea of having a business for the long haul is what they're missing. I'll get 2 quick quotes. Chris Farrell, great online marketer, says a product is not a business. So how many online marketers come up with a great product and they think they have a business? What they have is a product that sells well with affiliates. What's the back end and what's your funnel, right? And if you don't have that, you don't have a business. The second thing is a promotion is not a business. That's from John Carlton, who's a longtime copywriter. So Carlton is saying, he hears these people that have this great promotion, a video sales letter that's killing it on ClickBank, or it's the #1 wherever affiliate, but there's no business behind it. There's no infrastructure. So you do a couple of launches. Maybe you even put $1 million in the bank. I don't know. But is that what you want to do for the long haul? And without the fundamentals, especially on copy, creative, how it relates to list selection, how it relates to your offer, and then how it relates to creating back-end products, you're lost, I think, for the long haul. In the short term, you'll do fine because the barrier to entry online is so low.
Sorry, I just got a comment here. Okay, do you deal much with political writing at all, copywriters? Have you dealt in that space?
Political copywriters?
Copywriting. Is there a copywriter?
Yeah, I mean, I know, I follow, yeah, the answer is it's not a core area for me at all. I'm much more in health and finance, where the key areas at Boardroom. But I know the political fundraisers, and there's an art to political fundraising. What's the question?
Just had Titus, I can't pronounce his last name, say which direct response writer or team should Hillary have hired to have won?
It's way bigger.
It's a loaded question.
Yeah, wrong question. However, I understand the question. What was missing was the messaging. I don't know what copywriter would have done it right. In fact, I've written a bunch of blog posts recently about copywriting, even though I'm not one, although I've worked with every great one. And the thing that I found in my career is that the great copywriters have certain things in common. I wrote a blog post once called You May Not Know It When You See It. And I kind of made the analogy to pornography. Pornography, you'll know it when you see it. You might not know when you stumble across a great copywriter whether they're a great copywriter until you ask certain questions. And so, but then even if they're a great copywriter, are they going to be a right copywriter in your niche? And do they have the passion to go deep as opposed to go wide? And so, yes, I mean, I think what Hillary missed was the audience. I mean, if someone in her group had read Breakthrough Advertising and talked about that, you can't create the market. You got to see where the market is and then write to it. That's what she missed. Which copywriter? That's not the issue. The issue is the messaging and understanding what the audience wanted. What did that starving crowd want? And it's funny in the last election in the United States, when I followed that one of my takeaways was that Romney lost the social media battle to Obama. Obama's team understood not only the messaging was good, but they also understood that the medium had changed, that the media was not just about TV. It was much more about, Twitter and Facebook and email and what they did online in terms of what Romney did. And there were people who were telling the Romney campaign, basically saying, look, you're missing the boat here. You better get somebody on your team who understands social media. This was only 4 years ago. I mean, 4 years ago. So now you look and you got the candidate on the right, Trump, who was living on Twitter. So that was another thing that, he talks about it, but everybody's like putting him down.
Beforehand. Trump, he's been mastering social media for a long time now, especially when he went through the whole apprentice phase did.
Yeah, no, you got to give him credit for a 70-year-old guy where Romney kind of, I know somebody who was working indirectly with the Romney campaign, and they were totally stubborn. They said, we don't need the millennials. We don't need this. We don't need that. Go look at the results.
It happened the same in Australia a few years ago. We had our Prime Minister Kevin Rudd at the time. But he won purely because he had the social media presence. He got on TV. He did all that outreach that the other guys were like, no, we're politicians. We're too proper for that. But he won the popular vote for that reason.
No, you got to know where the audience is going. It's the Wayne Gretzky quote. You don't go where the puck is. You go where the puck's going. But that's what all the great copywriting books are about. It's funny. I went through the 6 legends in our book and accumulated all of these quotes from them. And they're all like copywriters, at least to some degree. Like Gene Schwartz wrote copy, Halbert wrote copy, David Ogilvy wrote copy, Hopkins wrote copy, Caples wrote copy, and Collier wrote copy, all 6 of them. They weren't all copywriters full time, but they all wrote copy. Not one of them didn't mention when they were talking about why they were successful as copywriters. None of them stopped talking about the market. It was almost like, if you don't, Gene Schwartz's favorite magazine was National Enquirer. Understanding what people wanted, needed, what was the conversation going on in their head, which is a quote. It might be a Halbert quote. So the idea that list selection and audience analysis was really as important as the actual writing down the copy is really one of the big things I took away from the book. I told Craig, one of his biggest takeaways was how they all were obsessed with research, which I think is another key thing. That gets lost because online marketing is, you can get online so quickly, you kind of take shortcuts and you don't do research, both in terms of your audience, your copy, your product. So the research thing is something that all 6 had in common. But the other was understanding audience.
That's actually a question I'll come back to around research. One thing I can't, as you've been talking about this, I can't help but draw a parallel between you and the guys at Aguar, Mr. Ford, Mark Ford, I'm not blanking his last name, Masterson.
Well, Mark Ford, Michael Masterson, and then there's Bill Bonner, started the company.
Yeah.
Well, Aguar and Boardroom weren't sister companies by any means, but we actually once had a conversation. I mean, it was never going to happen, but Marty and I once met with Bill and talked about, what if Aguar and Boardroom combined forces? Because we were very different in that they did a lot of deeper investment stuff than we did, more technical investment stuff. And on the health front, they did a much better job in the supplement area than we did. But we did, I think, a better job in the broad-based consumer markets than they did. And we used all the same copywriters. They were, we exchanged tens, if not hundreds of millions of names with them over the years. So, at the time in the 1980s, there were the three big kahunas there were a few others too, actually. I shouldn't just say there were three. But the three biggest kahunas in newsletter publishing were Agora, Boardroom, and Phillips Publishing. And at the time, Phillips was about maybe a $200 million business. Boardroom was about $100 million, and Agora was about 40. And Agora right now is probably well over 500 million with all their divisions, I would think. But the interesting thing is that the thing we had in common, the thread that we all had in common, was our commitment to working with the best copywriters and the best copywriters who understood markets way better than, they were all A-list copywriters as opposed to B copywriters. We paid them royalties. We treated them like partners. We knew that if they made $1 million a year, we were making a lot more than that. There was an abundant mindset in marketing that was not prevalent. There were other companies too. There was KCI Communications, run by a guy named Bob Kephart, who, when he got out of that business, he ended up consulting with Agora. And there were some others, Weiss Research, which is still around. Clayton Makepeace writes for them. Yeah. There's a bunch of great publishers, but Agora is still a hero company of mine. I mean, in fact, at my mastermind coming up, Mark Ford's going to be a guest, and I've got a member. I've got a member.
The hardest person to reach. Like, he's nowhere.
He's been a friend for. I'm a big admirer of Mark, and in fact, I knew Mark before he got to Agora. He ran a company in Florida called Newsletter Management with a guy by the name of Joel Nadell, and they were cutting edge. I mean, some people thought that they were, there was something shady in some of their marketing, but they were brilliant marketers. In fact, I think I read the Wikipedia page about them. They were the Attorney General went after them in New York State, and the whole thing was thrown out eventually. But I remember meeting Mark back then, and I said, this guy is one of the most brilliant marketers / copywriters, because he's not just a copywriter. He, really understood all the things I'm talking about.
That's why we keep going.
With the world class.
What you said from the beginning, as soon as you said entrepreneur, I'm like, Brian, Mark, very similar, and same with your relationship with Marty and him with Bill. I'm like, that is eerily similar to how you've both had that same sort of personalities, relationships.
Yeah,
you've both grown.
I'm honored you would put me in the same category as Mark Ford. I can't hold a candle to him when it comes to, the areas that he's an expert in. I mean, he is somebody I really look up to. But I do think that his relationship to Bill and mine with Marty, there might be some similarities. Mark is much more, he's so diverse. He's a real estate investor. There's a lot of things where I really feel like I can't hold a candle to him, but we're really there's a lot of mutual admiration there.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think you kind of mentioned it with one of your interviews with Kevin as well, talking about copywriting and how you're more strategist, or what is your real difference between you and Mark in terms of how you guys were part of your companies?
Yeah, Mark actually, with his background writing copy, which I didn't, I didn't write packages soup to nuts. Mark could work as an internal copy chief, where what that means is if even an A-list copywriter sends in copy to Agora that Mark would get, Mark could actually go through it page by page, edit it, and the copywriter would actually make changes based on what Mark recommended. Whereas on the other side, I didn't play that role at Boardroom, because I came up with ideas for headlines. I came up with ideas for overall platforms. So maybe that's where I might have said strategist versus, copy chief. Mark is both. I mean, Mark was able to do both. I could really only do one, not because I didn't have the ability. It just, I felt that there were people better than me who could do the real copy chiefing. I had people on staff who would do the proofreading, who would do the nitty gritty. I spent a lot of time with my copywriters before they started writing. I'm the one that would sit down with them and talk about the list universe. what we've mailed, what lists work, what lists didn't, what the selection criteria were, basically defining the avatar in a very specific way. So I was able to kind of be their partner as a marketer. And it's interesting, the role that I'm playing now, whether it's in Kevin Rogers' Copy Chief Group or at AWAI, where I just spoke, which is also a copywriters group, the role that I kind of play is kind of the marketer who oversaw a lot of great copywriters and copy, but I did not, copy chief in the way that a Mark Ford or a Bill Bonner does. And there was a guy at Phillips named Richard Stanton Jones, same kind of thing. He was like, they have skill sets I don't. So I wanted to differentiate that. I'm not putting myself down. I just know what I do well. And that what I do is the prep. And then also I was really good with the copywriters when we were doing postmortems, like postmortems, meaning after the mailing went out, what worked, what didn't, what should we test next? Those were the discussions where I was really the most effective. And with my clients now, my consulting clients, it's exactly like that. Like they'll come to me and say, I tested this, I did that. Let's put everything up on a whiteboard, figure out what would be next. That's where I have my strength. So it is more bigger picture, but it is about offers. It is about, messaging overall, but it's not the nitty gritty. Actually, I do headlines, I do subject lines, I do all of that. I name premiums. I'm very good at that, but I don't do like the what I call the real
copy editing and stuff. I see you almost very technical in what you're able to do, like lists, all that kind of stuff. Whereas I guess they're more nitty gritty as well. I guess that's the difference.
I would. Yeah, I mean, I think that coming out of the list business, which is what I did for 10 years, I think prepared me really well to be very audience centric as opposed to be copy centric. And I always talk about in other interviews, and I talk a lot about, that it may be that lists are actually a bit, I don't want to say more important, but if you get the list selection right, you kind of can throw almost anything at it in terms of copy, and you'll probably make some money. You won't do as well if you do shitty copy to a really targeted list with a good offer. However, the opposite is not true. Like the opposite, if you get copy from the best copywriter in the world, but you mail it to the wrong list with a shitty offer, you're probably not going to make any money. So you've wasted all your creative dollars. So what happens, I think, a lot online is that they get the list selection right because with affiliates and people endorsing you, it's not as difficult to find targeted universes. Yeah, so it's a lot easier to be able to find lists that work, and you can come up with offers. I mean, there are so many people doing so many different offers that people can copy each other's offers easily and legitimately. They can steal smart. But then they don't spend a lot of time on the creative, and they still make money, and then they kind of get a little bit lazy. And I think if you talk to a lot of top-notch copywriters today who are now moving from offline to online or have moved offline to online, they are finding that they can make big strides with online marketers with very little effort because the creative has not been paid as much attention to as it could have. So there's just a lot of opportunity for improvement on the creative side because they already got to some degree, the list selection and the offers dialed in. And then you take it to another level, like a Ryan Levesque, and so you start doing multiple segments. Now you could actually get even better, but make sure you match that up with messaging that goes to the segments.
Brilliant. If you were speaking to a younger person coming up who's trying to build a large company, what advice would you give them? Like, if they were to focus on two or three things that they focus on and just focus on that, what would you suggest?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, it's to focus on one or two things. I think that, when you have $1 million business and all you're talking about is how I'm going to 10X, and the 10X is about revenue, you get lost. You get lost because you think you have to do so many ideas to do that. And I think you've got to really, I would highly recommend reading books like Essentialism and The One Thing, and kind of really being focused on, what's going to give you the most leverage in your business. My journey, I mean, I don't see myself, creating another, 9-figure business in my life. I mean, I don't think so. But what I do want to do is be the coach to a lot of other businesses through my mastermind groups that are going to be the next 10 to $100 million businesses. And then my teachings and the speakers that I can bring and the intelligence I can bring will help them grow. So I think, you've got to be, the advice I give always is, being a lifelong student, you got to read the classics. You don't want to spend all your time educating yourself. You got to spend some time doing. But you also have to learn really intelligent outsourcing. That's why I bring people to my mastermind groups like Ari Meisel, who teaches, really how to use virtual assistants properly. And, really, not doing stuff, most entrepreneurs will spend a lot of time not doing the stuff they do the best. I mean, Dan Sullivan talks about this in Strategic Coach all the time, that if you're not working in your unique ability, first you understand what your unique ability is, but you have to know what that is and make sure that whenever you find yourself working outside your unique ability, that you outsource it. And you're going to have to be willing to spend some money on things that you don't like to do and things you don't want to do, even if you're compelled to be a control freak and do them yourself. So that's like the broad. The more narrow would be, as you're kind of narrowing down the ideas, make sure that the ideas that you come up with, I mean, when you know it, you see it usually, but it's like, I love the idea of what I call the horizontal vertical. And the horizontal vertical is like coming up with niching down as much as you can, but still when you niche down, there's like there's still a starving crowd there. So you see this like in certain niches in the medical field. Chiropractors, for example, the guys who coach chiropractors and the guys who were in that marketplace, they understood that chiropractors were a type of doctor that really saw that it was so competitive that marketing was going to be key to them. Whereas a normal physician in a family practice doesn't even want to know about marketing, even though they should. Yeah. So the marketing people who decided that being a chiropractor or being a coach to chiropractors was one of those niches that was a horizontal vertical, meaning that it was a really tight vertical, maybe competitive, yes, but those people were so hungry for marketing information that became a great business. So I think, that, and you kind of know it when you see it. I mean, in the health field, a horizontal vertical for us at Boardroom, unfortunately, was diabetes, or is diabetes. Diabetes is an epidemic in the United States. I mean, 30 million people, I think, are affected in one way or another, whether it's pre-diabetic, that they don't even know it. And so it was a big audience, and yet you could niche it down in copy and talk about some specific diet and supplementation and things that were out there in terms of health information that were nichey. It wasn't like general health, although we did well in general health info as well. But finding those horizontal verticals is just, I don't know, it's killer.
It's where your hot market is, when they've really got that pressing need. I've got to ask.
I mean, you hear it all the time in the product launch formula community, like Jeff Walker. The people that do best are the ones that not only niche, but then they niche again and niche again and niche again. And it's such a tight market, but it's such a hungry market by the time they get to it. And you never want to be number two. There's a great book called The Star Principle by Richard Koch, who is one of Perry Marshall's mentors, and he wrote a book on 80-20. And The Star Principle is brilliant. It's a brilliant book. And he just wrote a new book called Simplified. But the Star Principle is all about becoming a star company. And, one of the big principles is you don't want to be number two in a big market. You want to be number one in a small market.
That's cool. From outside of the technical aspect, can you talk a bit about the mental stuff that goes through building a company like that? How long did you work? What was the process like? What were the hardest aspects of building a company like Boardroom?
Yeah, I made a ton of mistakes. I sometimes I worked hard and not smart. I'll tell you that. I think the biggest challenges were always, the next shiny object and taking your eye off the ball on something that was a cash cow or something that was actually bringing in all the money, but you got bored with it.
Yeah.
And that's what most entrepreneurs go through. And I think in our journey, we did that. The biggest thing, though, that we did constantly was, again, never met a medium we didn't like. So we tested everything. The joke I always say in one of my bios is that, I tested the back of yogurt lids and I tested the back of ATM receipts. And I always say those were kind of good ideas at the time. Very, very difficult to not resist new ideas, but not resisting new media. I think always looking to see if some medium could work for you is important. But the biggest struggles, I think, were, working harder, not smarter, not outsourcing enough, feeling like, we had to do much more on our own as opposed to, finding experts. One of the big keys was once we started paying, incredible consultants and mentors to help us, that was one of the big breakthroughs for us, that we got so much further faster. It was sort of like our version of masterminding, even though we didn't attend a lot of masterminds back then. I think we understood the concept better than most, and we shared like crazy. Like I was always in groups with people that were definitely not as sophisticated as Boardroom, and yet I shared everything that we were doing, because if I gave them 4 ideas and they gave me 1, that was okay. This idea that everything's got to be a quid pro quo and it's got to be equal 50-50, that's bullshit. There's no way that you're ever going to get complete 50-50 with anything. So I never worked in the book Give and Take by Adam Grant. He talks about everybody's either a giver, a taker, or a matcher. And, a matcher is somebody as if I give to you, you give to me. And I think we never worked that way. Marty and I were always, sometimes we cut people off if they took advantage of us or if they ripped us off or something like that. But we were just really obsessive about giving to the community, giving to other companies, or whatever we learned, and what we got in return was incredible.
I think you really become the linchpin of your community. That's what makes you bigger, by being at center that everyone else revolves around. I think so many people in, I guess, the marketing space, when you start to see them go from this idea of I want to protect my ideas, can't share anything, to I'm going to give it all away and just share everything, that's when they start to rise more. That's what
when I got to the direct marketing business in the 1980s, the big kahuna in direct marketing was Reader's Digest. There are people probably listening to this that never even heard of Reader's Digest. Reader's Digest is one of the largest direct marketing companies, magazine companies ever. And they had state-of-the-art database marketing at the time. They had, tens of millions of names on their database. They were doing sophisticated modeling. They were doing all sorts of, stuff that no one else was doing. But they never spoke at the conferences. They never shared what they were doing. And the fact was that years later, what they were doing was not as proprietary as they thought. This attitude that we're Reader's Digest and you're not, did not serve them well. They ended up going bankrupt a couple of different times. The joke was, to me, and I love the company and I looked up to the company, but they had all this original artwork, like original Vincent van Goghs and Monets in the office. And when they sold all that artwork off for cash flow reasons, it was sort of like, it was hard to feel bad for them, because what they really put out, they weren't putting out bad karma, but I think it is bad karma when you think that you're smarter than everybody else. It's just, I think the world will not, it definitely rewards the givers. And, ultimately you're going to give and get taken advantage of at times, but net, it's going to be much better when you're in a giving mentality. And the story of Reader's Digest is one worth telling in terms of that, of not being a giving company, thinking that you were smarter than everybody else, and then they're the ones that didn't stand the test of time.
It's really comes down to the fall of great empires is always when the ego starts to get too much. You think
Exactly.
you're too good. Awesome. Back to the research side. This is actually one of the points I had with Craig. I was like, I'm not sure I agree, but I guess I understand why it works. But with research, do you have a process to it, or is it more what I hear most copywriters say? They just immerse themselves in the information.
No. I think there is a process to it. If I'm a copywriter, you got to know everything. You got to read everything. Look at all the quotes from Gene Schwartz about, you have to understand what makes the country tick all the time. He said, I have a great quote from him about, go around not understanding what the country's needs and desires are at your peril. And so the copywriter definitely has to take such deep dives. When I had medical information that I needed on certain things, I used to go to copywriters on certain things because if they wrote about it, they probably knew more than my doctor did. Now the research side as a marketer, though, is also very important. You don't want to have paralysis from analysis, but I never launched a product like a new book or a new newsletter without researching my current best buyers to see what else they might want. And so we did a lot of what we call concept testing, questionnaire testing, and there's a real methodology to it. And I don't have the patience for it. I'm definitely one of the guys that I have a good idea, screw it. In fact, I launched the diabetes book without really researching it because that one I just knew, once I researched it on my own, I didn't have to do much research to find out that if I had the right copy, I already had the starving crowd of people who needed this information. It was life-saving. So, and I found the same thing with memory and Alzheimer's and mind stuff. People were just so, worried about it that.
I said passionate, but you're saying a different word. It's the same thing.
Yeah. I mean, you that was the exception in terms of not doing research. More times than not, I never would have known that, for example, leads regarding cholesterol were better than just heart disease, or talking about cholesterol in some respects was better than talking about blood pressure, because when we were talking about a heart product, a heart disease product, for whatever reason, the mindset of the audience of the once we did our research, for some reason the idea of high cholesterol scared more people than the idea of high blood pressure, which I never understood. Now we use both; they're both really good to use, but I think blood pressure is way more dangerous. High blood pressure way more dangerous than high cholesterol, because high cholesterol could be a lot of different things. And you can get cholesterol under control with diet way easier than you can blood pressure, although you can get blood pressure under control with diet as well. So learning those kinds of things were critical, so that when we did a headline that became a control for 5 years called the 10-cent cholesterol cure, which was something that, the idea of getting something out of your kitchen cabinet that can reduce your cholesterol, that was killer stuff, So, yeah, don't underestimate research. You can't. You still have to go with your gut on certain things.
Guess what I'm getting at there is more, whenever I ask copywriter about their research process, it's always, I'm going to immerse myself. It's not, I go through at least get these questions and then I immerse myself to get whatever extra information is. Like, do the copywriters that work at Boardroom have a particular process they go through, or is it more just following their gut and No. Concept testing. I mean, I can't go into all the details, but obviously, that could be its own call. We could talk about research. Yeah. That's its own subject. But yes, we had lots of processes for research. We did a lot more quantitative research than we did in qualitative. Meaning, focus groups were okay, but it was more about mailing big chunks of our list based on the best buyers and what they would want the most. So, that was something that was, critically important for us. But I think I'm coming to the end of the time that we scheduled for you. So, being respectful of what you've got to do the rest of the day and get ready.
Right. I'm just telling my 10 o'clock that I'm going to just be a few minutes late. But yes, if we could figure out. I don't know. Are people asking other questions that seem to be
no questions at the
pressing?
moment. We've got Doug saying hello. Doug at Deanna, I think a friend of yours. But I guess wrapping up,
Yeah, Doug Deanna, great copyright.
Yeah, wrapping up would be one of the most pressing things that you would want to tell people right now. And finally, where can they get a copy of your book that's still available?
Yeah. So you can buy the book on Amazon, but I highly recommend you don't. I highly recommend you do, but you do it through my site, because if you go to thelegendsbook.com, TheLegends.com, thelegendsbook.com, you go there, you choose where you want to buy the book. I think you can go to Amazon, Barnes and Noble, or Indie Books, and you go to that. You go, opens up a new window, you buy the book, you come back to the site. There's an email address there that you send your receipt to, and then you're able to opt in to get a swipe file from all 6 legends: Ogilvy, Hopkins, Collier, Caples, Halbert, and Schwartz. All 6 legends, at least 10 ads per, like their best stuff. And you can download that. It's on the site. There's also videos you'll have access to from Ogilvy, Halbert, and Schwartz. And in fact, one of the Ogilvies is Ogilvy appearing on David Letterman, which is kind of cool. And then there's also a PDF of scientific advertising by Claude Hopkins, but it's an illustrated and annotated version that I got permission to give away by Bob Bly, a great copywriter. And so you get all of that, plus a couple of special reports that Craig put together that we didn't make it into the book from the legend. So you get all of that, just brilliant stuff in terms of the giveaways. And so that's the way you should buy the book. Thelegendsbook.com. It's readily available on all of those sites. And and then folks would also be opted into my list. I blog almost every week. I tell a lot of good stories about the legends, a lot of the stuff we talked about today. I think I probably do have to do now a blog post about why research is so important. And I think I've done some about that, or at least variations of that. And as far as what I want to leave your folks with is that, I think that education is a lifelong pursuit. It's not, I'm 58 years old, and I feel like I'm as much a student today as anything, even though I see myself as a teacher. And so I think on a recent podcast, my interviewer said to me, this idea that you learn by teaching couldn't be more true. And as someone coming from a perspective of being in the business for over 35 years and still being kind of a kid in a candy store, learning every day, really coming up with just incredible ways to, as I said, getting that golden ticket to getting into rooms with the best online marketers, sharing what I knew in the offline world and how it applies. I don't see any more important thing that a marketer or entrepreneur today could be doing than to be merging those worlds. So that's probably the overview. And, that's a lot of what the book's about and why I decided to do the book with Craig. I'll do it. I'm going to start working on my next book, which is more about, my story and my lessons. A lot of the questions you asked me today about, I've written blog posts about my biggest mistakes, and, you got to make some big ones to get somewhere. And, everybody's heard, don't be afraid to fail. I'm not going to get all cliched on everybody here. But it's absolutely, it's critical to not ignore the past.
Mate, this has been brilliant. Thank you so much. You enjoy your next meetings, interviews, and I'll speak to you soon.